Chris Shazi, Rocketman lead engineer and founder, will be going through our keynote presentation today on Mac OS onboarding. Just so I don't steal any more of his thunder, I will turn it over to Chris now.
Thanks a lot, Eric. And today we'll be going over the latest, well, not the latest Jamf feature, but probably one of the most anticipated ones, macOS onboarding, and kind of comparing that to what else is out there. We also have Greg with us from Jamf on the call, which will be helping with the Q&A afterwards. So we have a lot of people who have been working with this. They'll be able to talk about it. As Eric said, I'm Chris Chassis. I am the owner and lead engineer at Rocketman Tech. We host these meetups. We also manage a bunch of clients' Jamf environments. And our goal is to always try to figure out how to set up the best Jamf servers possible, which is kind of what this presentation is about, because we want to look at, hey, Jamf has this new feature and compare it to what we've been doing in the past with Dep Notify, with Swift Dialog, and with all these other applications that can help us set up a zero-touch provisioning workflow. So what we used to do was called the onboarding script. And that was one script that called a bunch of custom policy triggers within Jamf Pro to control when and how each policy is deployed. So on the right, this is kind of an example of what that looks like. You can see it's going through and calling Jamf policy dash event for each one of these different policies that are happening. So we can control exactly when and how these are being deployed. And it's often being used in conjunction with something like Dep Notify or Swift Dialog or IBM Notifier or anything that can create kind of a GUI front end so the user can see what's happening along the way. And this gives us complete control over the provisioning process, which is something we really need when we're setting up enterprise level deployments through Jamf Pro. So let's take a look at what this looks like in action. So this is a workflow we set up for one of our clients. So it's going to go through and install all the core applications, obviously sped up a lot. And then in this step, it's connecting the user to VPN. So it's showing the user how to connect to VPN and then waiting for them to do that before it installs McAfee, which requires internal resources. And then we walk them through setting up the now legacy company portal and conditional access. So obviously sped up quite a bit, but that just gives you a quick look at what this method looks like in the front end. If we poke on the back end a little bit, you can see we have a bunch of policies here set up with custom triggers. And then we have one specific policy set to deploy Dep Notify, and this script specifically onboarding with Dep Notify that's going to bring us through all these policies. So it's one script calling a bunch of custom policies, and this script is running throughout the entire provisioning process. So it starts at the beginning, it calls a bunch of other policies, and then it continues through until the last policy is called. And then you get this giant log at the very end of it because it's called all these different policies and is doing all this stuff. Again, the reason we do this is that it just allows complete control over this provisioning process because we can tell Jamf exactly when to do different things. So the main policy is triggered by enrollment complete. There's custom triggers for each of the policies. We use caffeinate during the process so that the computer doesn't go to sleep. We pause the Jamf framework so their policies don't run. We wait for the user to log in, and when the script finishes, we disable caffeine, re-enable the Jamf framework, and clean up Dep Notify. So that's the method we've kind of been using, and a lot of admins have been using for probably the last 8 years or so. There's always been some issues with this onboarding script, though. The first one is this enrollment complete trigger sometimes doesn't trigger when you're using DEP, which is one of the main ways we're setting up computers. Okay, so we can get around that by using check-in and enrollment triggers. So we use the check-in trigger along with the enrollment trigger, just in case it doesn't hit, then hopefully it will hit the check-in trigger when the first Jamf check-in comes in. But that creates another issue where the provisioning script can potentially run twice during the provisioning workflow. And the reason that is because this provisioning script often takes longer than 15 minutes to run, and that will give us another check-in. So before Jamf has said that it's done running, it might start running again. And we can also get other policies running during this provisioning workflow, which can get a little confusing if we're trying to control exactly when things are happening. We can fix this, though, by just disabling the Jamf framework while this script is running. But that creates another issue where the Jamf framework can stay disabled if anything happens in this process. Let's say there's some exit during the script, or the user interrupts what's happening, or even just turns off their computer, that Jamf framework can stay disabled. Another issue is the computer can go to sleep, which we can fix through using the caffeine binary. But then caffeine can stay enabled after the workflow if, again, we aren't able to properly clean it up. We also need to close dep notify in the end, and if anything happens, or if you're using another application, it doesn't get properly closed. There's also issues logging this script, because when you're doing this thing where you have one script doing a bunch of daisy chain policies, I've just seen it happen sometimes where the script doesn't get logged up to Jamf Pro. It has problems doing that. And on top of this, when we make changes, like add a policy to the workflow, we have to manually update the script when adding new policies. So we're kind of constantly working with this script to keep it up to date with all of our clients. And it's been a bit of a headache. And it sometimes just feels like we're fighting the Jamf binary as we're adding all these fixes to this workflow. It works, it's fine, but it seems like there must be a better solution. So we were kind of looking into like making a more modular approach. But then came along macOS onboarding, because here's already a way that Jamf has created to kind of solve some of these issues. So let's talk through some of the benefits of macOS onboarding. It allows for control over the provisioning process, similar to that we get before. It's triggered by self-service, so it's not triggered by enrollment complete or any Jamf trigger specifically. It's actually triggered by the self-service application. And it naturally waits for the user to log in. So instead of having to put that into a script, because it's being triggered by self-service can't run at the login screen. So it's already going to run once the user logs in. It keeps the computer on during the process, so it naturally does that same caffeinate type of feature. And it's built into Jamf's current workflow, which is one of the biggest selling points. And another thing is it works with Mac App Store apps, which is something that was pretty much impossible with the past with any of our other methods. And this is on top of the fact that it's easier to set up. It's definitely much easier. It's built into Jamf, but it provides a different type of stability than we've had with all these other solutions in the past. We should talk about the limitations, though, because there are quite a few of them. I mean, you can't customize the display. You can't use it outside of enrollment. You can't play videos, add pictures. You can't change the text. Can't open a website. Can't change the window size or window position. Can't prompt the user for information. You can't prompt the user to accept a EULA. You can't guide the users through a process, and it doesn't work with app installers currently. So begs the question, what does it actually do? Well, it stabilizes the enrollment process. It controls the order of the installs. It shows the users what is installing. But that's pretty much it. And for a lot of our clients, and I'm sure for a lot of you, that's not quite enough. So like, what's the solution here? I think macOS onboarding does quite a lot that we want, especially that stability to the onboarding workflow. But we need a little bit more than what it's currently offering. So the solution is macOS onboarding plus Swift dialog. dep notify, IBM notifier, or anything else you want to use on top of it. So essentially using the policies within Jamf Pro to launch different things to do stuff outside of what macOS onboarding is capable of. So finally, let's take a look at what this workflow looks like. So first of all, it automatically launches self-service, and it's going to bring you through all the different policies within your Jamf server. So this is a Swift dialog, very simple one, just to select a building, and then I'll also rename the computer. So that's an example of how you can put a Swift dialog window inside of the macOS onboarding workflow. Then it'll install everything else. In this case, our Zoom package launched Zoom. So the user would get this and could maybe log in, go through and launch the rest of or install the rest of the applications. This is the issue Hugo was talking about where it won't allow you to see the bottommost thing. But then it's going, so this is another tool we developed to allow users to update screen recording. So it's basically, there's a dep notify window with a loop waiting to see when users click through those different applications. So that's how we can use macOS onboarding with tools we've already built so that we can get the best of both worlds, the stability of this workflow built into Jamf, along with the customizability of dep notify, Swift dialog, and anything else we want to use. So let's take a look at what this looks like in our Jamf Pro server. And here we are. And if you haven't seen this set up yet, it's a little bit interesting. So what you're doing is in the policies, you're not actually going to be scoping, or you're not going to use like check-in or anything else as a trigger. You're going to use self-service as a trigger. So we set up all these different policies. We have this Welcome to Rocket Man one that has a bunch of different stuff we have bundled in here. And then we'll go through and do everything else. We like to still order things just so we can see it in the correct order. But everything that we're putting in here is deployed to self-service and doesn't have any other trigger. Same with the Mac App Store apps we're deploying. We're making sure those are in self-service as well and not deployed automatically. You can see that if I open one of these up. And then inside of macOS onboarding, so you need to enable this in order to get it working. And then you need to select which policies and applications you want in your onboarding workflow. I was just testing some stuff, so I turned this off, but these were normally there. And then in the overview, you can drag the order that you want things to be installed in. One cool thing about this when it comes to Mac App Store apps, the video is pretty quick, but in the past, I've added Mac App Store apps to my provisioning workflow, and it's never worked that great, where sometimes they'll install right away, and other times it'll take 30 minutes or an hour to install, which is really bad if it's something that's very important to your workflow, like Okta Verify or something, where you need that before anyone can log into any of the other applications on their computer. With macOS onboarding, it seems to do something different when it installs the macOS apps, where they come down pretty quickly. It's not waiting 5, 10, 15 minutes. It's like it's triggered and it starts installing just like it would a policy. So that's something we really haven't seen before. You can also add configuration profiles here, but I don't know if there's much of a need for that. I guess if you had a really important dependency you wanted to put in here and you wanted to make sure that that configuration profile was installed before then. But most of the time, configuration profiles come down before any policies do anyway, because it's much quicker to install them. So if we look at some of these other scripts here, So for the set the computer name, this is a Swift dialog script. So we just install Swift dialog and then run that script. And then with this app setup helper one, we're installing a video and then running the app setup helper script as well. And this also installs dep notify during the process, which is needed for that. So this is kind of the methodology we've been using with it. It's setting up other advanced policies to work within this somewhat basic and limited workflow. Another thing I do is because one thing that's important to our workflow is dependencies and making sure that something's in place before we run a specific policy. So I did that specifically with the doc. So we have a script here. It's called application dependency, and I have a link for it on the follow-up materials that I linked to earlier on our GitHub. But this is essentially a script that says, hey, I want to make sure that all these applications are in place before running a separate policy. So this runs a policy trigger of onboarding doc to set the doc. And I can do it. You can add a timeout to it. For this one, I only have 5 seconds, but you can add, as many seconds as you want to that to wait for a specific thing to happen. But this is the basic methodology behind what we do if we wanted to have a while loop waiting for something to happen before something gets installed. Just create a separate script to call a policy. And then, so this will call the onboarding doc trigger afterwards. And then if you look inside of here, this sets up the doc. We're still using Jamf's built-in doc thing instead of something like docutil. We try to use things that are built in Jamf as much as possible. But here's that onboarding doc trigger. So if there was a problem with any of these other installs that are going to be on the doc, it'll come up as a failure here, and it won't set the doc. And then we'll be able to rectify that before running this again so that the user doesn't get question marks in their doc. So that's kind of a quick demo of what this looks like. I don't have time to go into a lot of the scripts we put together, but that's the methodology behind it. Use macOS onboarding, add policies that do more advanced stuff to the workflow, including things like Swift dialog, dep notify, or anything else that we do. I want to talk through a couple caveats here. Probably the biggest one is that app installers are currently not supported. I've linked a couple times to this feature request for that. So if this is something you want, make sure you upvote that. I'll also say that app installers will wait to be deployed until after the macOS onboarding workflow is complete. So if you wanted to use app installers with the macOS onboarding workflow and just have them install whenever, it's going to wait till after. So it's really, the app installers already weren't great for onboarding workflows in general because it was hard to work them in because you can't call them by a binary or anything. And now it's even worse with the macOS onboarding workflow. So what we've been doing is packaging everything, adding it to our workflow, and then just adding app installers to applications afterwards, just to the app when the applications exist. So it just does patch management. It doesn't do the deployment, which is annoying because we still have to update a package. Obviously, you could use something like Installamator as well, since that will still be able to be triggered by a policy. And if you set up Mac App Store apps without VPP content, they will stall in the provisioning process. Probably not super worth pointing out. I just ran into it when I didn't have enough licenses for an app, and that does create problems. So if you don't have your Mac App Store apps set up correctly, it can stall things as they're going through this process. And then lastly, we pointed out the error we were running into, where if you have more than 14 items, the 15th was not visible. I have confirmed that is a product issue within Jamf 2. I'm sure that will be fixed in the next couple releases, but wanted to point that out. Tips, tricks, and troubleshooting. First thing is to ensure current users don't get macOS onboarding. So in order to do that, you have to deploy a script to all computers to basically say, hey, the onboarding is already complete. That script is there. And as an extra precaution, only scoped your onboarding policies to computers enrolled after today. So before today, deploy this to make sure that they don't run the macOS onboarding workflow. And then after today, just scope all your onboarding policies to that. And then you can ensure that current computers aren't all of a sudden getting this onboarding thing pop up when they open self-service. If you want to restart the onboarding workflow just for testing, this was a really useful thing that I was doing. You can just delete that plist we were talking about before, and then run sudo jamf flush policy history. It'll bring you right back through the onboarding workflow. I have a quick video just going through this. So after this is run, you can go ahead and run this command. And then all you need to do is launch self-service. And then onboarding will start running again. You can test out whatever policies you wanted to. Of course, that time I only had flushed one of my policies, but this second example shows me actually running that command I said before, flush policy history. This is flushes the policy history for that specific computer, and then it will rerun through all the policies.